Good morning, everybody, or afternoon for many of you. Thank you for joining us. This is Ellie Feldman from Wingman Insurance, and we're really excited to have you here today to talk about claims. So our goals for today, as you can see in front of you, we want to talk about specific examples of some cyber claims, some broader picture about cyber claims. We're going to learn a little bit about the claims process, and then we're going to open it up to lots of Q&A. If this is your first time, or even if it's not, there's a questions section on your screen. If at any time during our chat you have a question, please chat it into me and I will try to get every question answered by our panel. So that brings me to our panel. We are absolutely thrilled today to have two heavy hitters with us. First up is Jeremy Schrum. He is the cyber team leader over at Access Insurance. He leads this product that we sell and has been instrumental in helping us facilitate the Wingman philosophy with the best product on the market. And we have John Spies. He is the claims manager for cyber, tech, and E&O. He's got a lot of things on his plate, but he's the best claims resource I've ever worked with. So if you've got claims questions, something tells me John's got answers. So thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. That was quite the introduction. Thank you.
Look, we always talk about the importance of talking about claims, but it's never more important than with cyber, where claims examples can be the difference between making a sale and not. So we appreciate your guys' time today. So I'm going to start with the scary stories. Can each of you guys tell me, all of us, about some of the worst claim stories you guys have come across?
Right. So this is John. Thank you all for having me, and hopefully you get something out of this. Can everybody? I hope everybody can hear me. I'm sure you can all speak back. But so worst is all relative. But I have what I consider to be the best worst claim scenario, and I actually handled it. It was from almost exactly 3 years ago, and I was reminded by it in a recent article that I read on Advising about two doctor medical practice up in Michigan. It was ENT facility. It was Brookside ENT in Battle Creek, Michigan. And I don't know if anybody saw this, but earlier this month they closed their doors because they had a ransomware attack, and they couldn't get. They refused to pay the ransom, and they were retirement age, so they just decided to close up shop. That doesn't help their patients any. But I think, according to the article, it's the first doctor's office or physician's clinic that has closed due to a ransomware attack. So it can just illustrate, exactly what the worst case scenario can be. But it reminded me of a claim that I handled back in April 2016. One of our insureds was a telemarketer for approximately 250 clients. They handled PCI and other sensitive PII data for those 250 or so clients, and so they were not the data owner. And in April 2016, they experienced a ransomware attack, and they were given a 48-hour window with which to respond and pay the ransom. Rather than notifying Access, they decided to handle it on their own. They got their IT vendor in there, and the IT vendor thought that he had taken care of her. Well, 2 days later, the bad actor logged back into their system and deleted all of their entire database, everything they had. Over 30,000 credit card records, and 2,200 employee, past and current employee PII, Social Security numbers, employee data, things like that. And then they notified Access. So we did what we could. We got our breach response team in place. We got a law firm, a forensics firm, got in there, and there was very little that could be done. So this was back in April 2016. The demand was 150 Bitcoin. At that point, it was about $500 a Bitcoin. So that was about a $75,000 ransom demand, which was fairly large for that time, for that period. But so they didn't pay it. They thought they had it handled. They lost all of their data and ultimately closed their doors and left their 250 clients in the lurch. So this was bad for the insured, just as bad for their clients, because that these partnerships that they have, they all have contracts with indemnity agreements in them. Our insured would have had to, their only obligation was to notify their clients. The clients had the notice requirements under state statute. So these clients were all left with holding the bag, notifying all of their customers that their PCI data was accessed, and then we were expecting 250 claims from these clients, and we never got them. We got a few dozen, but they basically just ate the cost, and by not having any kind of breach response incident response plan, this insured kind of put their clients and their customers in a lurch.
So there's sort of two lessons you can learn from there that, at first sign of a ransomware attack, call the insurance company, number one, I guess.
Right.
And number two would certainly be that the insurance would have made it a lot easier had they had, having the insurance would have made it a lot easier.
Correct. We would have had a breach response team in there immediately. We would have identified the problem, negotiated with the bad actor, and ultimately probably paid the ransom because they didn't have adequate backup. And then the insured would probably still be in business today.
What about you, Jeremy? Any crazy stories?
Well, I'm going to let John tell another one of his stories, but I think we've looked at a lot of techno. So Axis has just gone to a global center of excellence for cyber, and so we're onboarding a lot of partners to help us evaluate risk, help us, our forensic vendors getting deeper relationships with them. So I've just been exposed to a lot of global forensic firms, law firms, and three things that make as someone who sells insurance, make it really scary and fully realize the need for insurance is three things that just are on every report. There's a Baker Hostetler report just came out. Every report, essentially the key findings include these three things. One is that digital transformation, the incorporation of social media, cloud, Internet of Things, from the person who sells tires to a very technologically advanced company, digital transformation is changing every business. And so everyone's incorporating and collecting data and trying to use data. When you do that, though, you have this risk. The second conclusion is that the IT guy is being stretched. So no matter how simple or how complex, that the IT guy is really not able to deal with everything, because my third conclusion is that no organization is safe. No matter, reviewing people that spend 10% of their IT budget on security versus someone that spends 50% of it on security, or someone that is a very, very small company that doesn't spend much at all, they're still susceptible to the same risk attacks. And really, no matter what you do, you can't be immune from human error, from ransomware attacks that are so easy to launch to tens of thousands of people. So I will say that from a person who sells and tries to put a product that takes care of these issues most, and I'll let John tell one of his nasty stories.
Okay. Again, it's all relative as to what the nasty stories are. So I often cringe when we get a social engineering incident that's reported, and the insured has no protocols or procedures in place for authenticating the transaction. And to us, that's one of the first things we tell people, when they ask us, how do you prevent an incident from happening? Well, you educate your employees. You put them through training, and you invest in the resources necessary to do so. And because I don't know how many times I see it comes in, and the social engineering incident was hey, here's an invoice. We know we sent you this yesterday, but the payment details have changed. You need to wire it to this account. And no one asks questions. No one makes phone call. No one walks down the hall, makes the payment, and the next thing you know, the insured's out of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, and I've seen even millions before. So that always makes me cringe too. That's a simple fix that every insured can do, but it's a horror story in and of its own. As far as I'll give an example of a phishing incident that we had about a year ago. It was a fairly large hospital system where the doctors of this hospital were contacted with a phishing email and a link that said, hey, you need to go in and change your payroll direct deposit information. And 189 of them clicked on it, and it wasn't all doctors, some of them were admin staff, things like that. 189 of them clicked on it, entered in their credentials, changed their payroll information. So not only did some of these doctors and admin staff give access to their payroll, so their paychecks were diverted, but the bad actors also got those credentials and were able to log into all of those email accounts. It was an Office 365 incident. And in those 189 email accounts, it was determined that there were nearly 3 million documents that needed to be reviewed to see if the bad actor had access to PHI. So I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the process of document review on some of these phishing incidents, but they're very time consuming and expensive. So not only did we enlist the services of a forensic expert who, sometimes they can run queries and narrow down the data that needs to be manually reviewed. In this case, they narrowed it down to about little over 1 million documents that still had to be reviewed manually. So they enlisted Epic and Kelly Services, this document review services. It took a month or so, and they spent about $1.5 million total between forensics and document review. Most of that was, document review, and that was $1.5 million. And then they ended up having to notify 1.4 million people, and of course, a class action lawsuit has now arisen out of it. Because of that these documents that contain PHI may have been accessed by the bad actor, and therefore notification was required. So
John,
you're already talking.
Do you think this is limited in its scope to more like healthcare risks, or is this the same level of risk for all different kinds of companies?
Oh, all different kinds. And when you go into the next couple of slides on the metrics that I'll show you, you can see where the phishing incidents, they hit across the 3 biggest industries that we see.
All right, so that's a great transition. Let's talk a little bit about what the most common claims are that you see and how much they cost per incident.
Right. Okay, so on this first slide, you'll see the average. This is data just from 2018, and this pertains to access claims only. So this isn't across the whole industry. This is just for access on data that we've gathered. But as you can see, the average claim that we would pay out on malware hacking is it's 41,000, phishing 61,000, and the reason why and the rest of them are 25,000 physical loss, 32,000 ransomware, 34 social engineering, and then 9,700 for unauthorized disclosure. Well, so the reason why anecdotally why phishing is more expensive, it's because not only do you have to bring in forensics, but often you have to bring in the data review, the document review, and often that is manually done. So there's not a real easy way at this time to pinpoint exactly what documents were accessed by the bad actor. So often you're left with, and you're able to narrow it down a little bit, but then you're left with a relatively large bucket of documents that have to be reviewed for PHI and notification purposes. So if you can move to the next slide.
You got it.
You can see that our book is a little more heavily tilted towards healthcare, but 40% of our overall claims come from healthcare, and then the other 2 big ones are professional services and financial services. And so those line up with your industry norms. I think those are the big three that you typically see. I think, the 40% might be a little bit skewed because Access has a relatively robust book of healthcare policies.
No, but this
So
does
you wanna
help
go-
our agents understand, these are industries that know to purchase cyber because all of these people obviously already have cyber policies, so they're an easier sell, and also that the claims history is there for them to explain why the coverage is important.
Yeah, I think there's about a 70%. If you look at healthcare, financial services, and retail, I think, given who's gotten hit in the past, retail might include Target, the hotels, they've gotten hit, so everyone bought. And so I think there's some estimates. There's about a 70% of folks in that industry, in that sector, purchase cyber. But the opportunity, there's opportunity there for that other 30% because it's a pretty standard buy. For the other, they certainly need it, but haven't had the anecdotal. We're talking about a lot of small claims, but we've been on Sony and we've been on the Marriott Towers, and so we've seen that side of it, and it's very ugly, and it's a lot of money at stake. But certainly, relatively for small business, it still is just as devastating. You're going out of business transaction that how these claims are hitting people have really kind of changed. The number of lawsuits, I think I saw some report. This showed the number of lawsuits. I think that this report had 750 plus incidents and only 4 resulted in a lawsuit, because I think the plaintiff's bar still doesn't have putting a lot of effort into overriding some of the decisions that keep them from having standing. But everything else has gone up. The costs, the AG actions. We've got a lot of claims where we're sitting on a call with 10, 12 different states AGs on a small claim because it's affected the PII of multiple state citizens. So it still is very expensive. That you've got to have representation for. That's kind of the big. The trends are very interesting year to year. There's a lot of good reports that try to express that, and sometimes you get they're outsized by a big by a Marriott or something like that. But that's what I like about John's is it's all kind of our experience and something that hits very close to home, and I can see the correlations in what we do day to day.
Well, that brings us to the next portion, which is, what kind of claims are they? Are they social engineering? Are they, what are you seeing mostly?
Right. So you'll notice there's a big number for unauthorized disclosure, and that happens primarily in the healthcare business where you'll see, at checkout, a patient will be given the wrong prescription or the wrong document to fill out or sign or something like that. Or maybe there's a billing error that leads to someone getting the wrong bill for someone else. And so, that's a disclosure PHI. And that's unauthorized disclosure, but those are typically very small. So if you can refer back to the very first slide, while you've got the volume of the unauthorized disclosure claims, and realistically the severity, see, it's only $9,700 per disclosure or per paid out claim. So even though that's a very large bucket of the claims that we get in, it's small in terms of severity. So we always have to kind of.
Is this chart based on claim counts or based on actual cost per claim?
It's based upon per claims paid. So we would not, we did not include claims where no payment was made.
Which we've had a lot of.
What's that?
We've had quite a few of.
Yes. So and as you can see, so if you go back, so you've got unauthorized disclosure here. You've got, you can go back to that slide. Sorry. you got your social engineering. You've got, I'm sorry, not social engineering, unauthorized disclosure. You've got ransomware, and you've got malware hacking and phishing. Those are your biggest ones, and those are the ones that we see almost on a daily basis. And so, if you go to the next slide, I've got it broken out by industry, so you can see the big three that are most common: healthcare, financial services, and you can see the breakdown by the actual industry itself. So as you see, the healthcare number is overwhelmingly dominated by the unauthorized disclosure, and then also you've got financial services here that's dominated by ransomware, and then professional services, you kind of have a mix between malware, hacking, and phishing. So it's interesting to try to read into these numbers. Obviously, everyone can have an opinion, but I think with the professional services, why you might see so many phishing claims is because they don't have as many professionals. You've got doctors and accountants and engineers and things like that are all working remotely. They all log into the Office 365 remotely, and maybe they don't have as many safeguards in place to prevent access to those email accounts. And so, that might be a reason there. Maybe they aren't as heavily fortified as the financial services is, but somehow ransomware is getting into the financial service area. So,
And so
I think
is a big one for financial services because they control so much of people's
right,
banking.
they deal a lot, with financial transactions, so therefore it makes sense that they're getting a lot of social engineering claims.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so what tips do you have based on all of this information for all of the agents out there to give their insureds to be better prepared?
Well, to be better prepared, I mean, obviously, you need to create some kind of incident response team and plan, and then you have to have a leader who's the point of that plan and who's in charge of the plan and the leader of the team who's responsible for security and privacy in the company. And the buck stops there. That way, there's always one person that can be accessed and can be the point person in the event of an incident. So, and then once you've created that response plan, I think if you create some kind of practice or exercise in responding to a breach, we've got insureds who do mock breaches, if you will, and they'll spend a half a day going through the motions of what would happen if they had, say, a large ransomware event or denial of service attack to their website or something like that. And and then with practice comes perfection, I guess. Although I've yet to see the perfect incident response team yet. So then the other thing is we kind of alluded to at the beginning of this call, was that I would get familiar with your insurance carrier and its vendor and list and panels of breach response of services. Identify who it might be that you need to notify in the instance of a claim. Who are you going to call? So we often have insureds who will reach out pre-breach and say, okay, who is on your panel? And if they recognize a name on there, we've worked with Brian Cave before, we've worked with Mullen Coughlin before. We like those guys. Let's reach out to them and see if they can give us some tips. And they'll do that.
That's one of the first audience questions. And Jeremy, I'm sorry in advance. Where can people get training for their staff on how to do this? On how to set up an incident response plan, or more specifically to Marion's question, what constitutes, for example, what constitutes authentication, and how do we teach insureds to authenticate for social engineering purposes?
So two things. First of all, every policyholder and certainly all your agents can have access to this as well. We have an eRisk Hub subscription that every policyholder gets a password to get into it, and it has a lot of how to write a privacy policy, how to create a breach response, how to do a cost of a breach calculation. That is all included with every policyholder. In addition to that, though, we would be happy if anyone wants to reach out and have a specific, request. We would be happy to do that. We've recently hired 3 folks. They happen to be based in the UK in Lloyd's, but they work for us, and we're going to add some in the US to do this kind of education. And we'd be happy to help with any specific requests that anyone has.
And I'll throw out there that the e-risk hub that he was talking about is available to all of you in the tools section under claims and resources with the login information and everything you might need right there. So if you have any questions about that, reach out to Heather or I, and we'll help you get set up with e-risk hub.
As far as the authentication question, just
yeah, go ahead.
Authentication. So often our insureds will, they'll discuss pre-breach, or they'll discuss with a law firm, and they'll get, or they'll set up a best practices, which can be, okay, you need to make a phone call. On top of an email, you need to make a phone call to this person directly, or you need to walk down the hall. And I mean, it can be something, has to be something more than nothing. It can be a phone call, it can be walking down the hall, it can be, an instant message. It can be something that makes an attempt to try to validate that the person you're talking to is not a fraudster. So that's the best way to explain it. But most companies that have an authentication process, they will establish it themselves as, this is what we want to do, this is what our protocols are. And then when we get the phone call, we'll ask, did you follow your own authentication protocols?
So, all right, one more thing, and then we've got a bunch of questions.
Sure.
What's your one takeaway, or what's the one thing you would tell a company when talking about cyber?
Well, so my one takeaway is actually something I've changed my mind on over the years, and so I've been handling cyber claims for roughly 10 to 12 years, and I would pay the ransom. So back when we first started handling these types of claims, the FBI would counsel against paying the ransom. You don't want to be a target. There was the fear that if you pay it once, they'll come back again and again and again. Well, in my experience, and I think the industry is going that way, paying the ransom is much less painful than not. If you don't have valid backups, and it's a reasonable ransom, and you can get you back up in business again in 24 to 48 hours, it is it's almost like it's almost like a pill that you can just swallow, and maybe it was a little bitter, but
but that's why you buy insurance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so you mitigate your loss. Sometimes restoring your systems back up can be painful as well, but it's much worse than being down for a week or 2 or 3 if you're trying to restore from backup, or you're trying to recreate the data internally because you don't have backup. That's my evolution is pay the ransom.
Great. So we've got a couple of questions for both of you guys. The first is a specific example. A payroll company, and this is from Derek, a payroll company uses software from a vendor. The vendor was hit with ransomware, and the vendor could not pay the ransom essentially, and the company lost 30% of their clients. What's the reporting period like when it's not a cyber attack on you? Is it notification when you find out about it? How does that work?
It's all you. So, the stuff sits around, even the internal attacks, sometimes sit around for 30, 60, 80 days is I think the average in the last report I read. So everyone knows it's going to sit around. It's certainly, when it's a third party, it's going to sit around. The data is yours, whether you outsource it to a cloud provider or a third party IT vendor. That data is yours, and you have the responsibility to it, to the folks you collected it from. So obviously, in that scenario, you're going to have liability, you're going to have duties, and you're going to have to spend money doing the right thing. But the trigger is always your knowledge of it.
And how long do they have to notify you?
We put dates. Is it 60 now? The 60 days is there just to. It absolutely. I'll give you a great example. It behooves you to do it because cyber is different than other things, and we have to. 24 hours might be too late. Massachusetts, some states have really, really tight time frames and where you have to notify your clients if you've had a breach. And besides that, it's you just cannot. Ransomware. You have 24 hours, 48 hours, 96 hours to respond. It can't. The work that needs to be done can't be done unless we get quick reporting. We really haven't had issues with late reporting, and due to the fact it's when you find out, something might be bad out there and a problem with your vendor for a year, but if you don't find out about it until when you find out about it, there's no time period that's running. We have a date there again to
speed up the process,
induce reporting, but I don't think we've ever used that.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
What's an example of a claim where nothing was paid out? That was from Kim.
Well, nothing was paid. Well, so typically, we get a lot of notices of things. Well, so a lot of those unauthorized disclosures that I was talking about, we'll get these little, often they're bordereaux. They're claims that, hey, we disclosed to two people's PHI accidentally at checkout. We handled it internally. So some of these hospitals have their own internal legal staff, and they handled the notification themselves. They didn't have to provide credit monitoring, and therefore, there's no need for forensics. They have their own legal staff. So, that's an example of not paying out a claim.
But there's a lot of times when we always want people to call.
There are times where we don't even open up a claim. So you might have an incident where an insured just has a bad feeling about something or is concerned about something, and they'll call one of our breach response firms. They get an hour free of consultation, and oftentimes, we won't even open up a file because the breach response, the law firm will will pacify our insured's concerns, and that'll be it.
Well, I mean, we've had things where it's Friday afternoon, you called the law firm, you didn't call us, you just call our law firm. They say, yeah, that's a little strange. You had 64 gigabytes exfiltrated when that's 100 times your normal. That's weird. Let's call one of our forensics guys. They can port in remotely and say yes or no, you don't have a problem. This is a normal thing, and it was doing an update and everything's good. Or they can say, yes, you've got a huge problem. That was good to have called us, even though you haven't. The reporting under the policy is a claim or a circumstance. You could have something that's not even, a suspicious circumstance that may give rise to something. You just don't feel good about it, and everyone's left, and it's Friday evening, and one IT guy's there. If you have our reporting available to those people, it's going to at least give them peace of mind, if not, the entire organization peace of mind, that they have that ability to kind of outsource this incident response, which essentially at this point in the cyber insurance market, that's essentially what it is. We don't worry so much about the liability. We're worried about the you don't have the money as a small business to create your own internal CISO or internal breach response that's going to satisfy a situation. You're outsourcing that by buying an insurance policy.
So we have guys, send in your questions. We're going to wrap up in a second. Laura wanted to make sure that she heard you correctly, John. Your policy is, and when appropriate, you pay the ransom, or do you guys reimburse the ransom? How does that work?
Our policy is a reimbursement policy. Often the vendors that we use to get the Bitcoin require payment in a very short period of time. So the insured will pay that. Often it's within the retention. And if it's beyond the retention, we'll reimburse the insured.
Fantastic. Any last questions, everybody? Oh, yep, here's one more. Are there any types of incidents that are specifically excluded from the coverage? That's a tough one, Aaron.
Specific data breaches or
attack, really not an attack vector that we say that's so nasty that we don't want to touch it. There's no exclusions like that. There's no minimal security elements required, and there's no excluded Raikou ransomware. We don't take all comers.
Is it because of the evolving nature of the risk, or you just want the policy to be as broad as possible?
Yeah, I don't think we'd be doing very well if we went about excluding individual attack vectors and different types of attacks.
Well, I think you've sufficiently scared the pants off of everybody who's listened, both of you. We're all now terrified to use Microsoft 365, that's for sure. But we appreciate your time, both of you. Thank you for joining us. Guys, if you have any follow-up questions, or if I didn't get to any of your questions, I'll try to reach out. But I just want to thank everyone for joining us. This has been incredibly helpful. Again, if you have any follow-ups, please let us know. Stay tuned for our next webinars, and let us know if there's any topics you specifically want to hear next time. So thank you for joining us, and thank you guys for being a participant.